Most organizations don't get breached because they were hacked. They get breached because something stayed exposed long enough that attacking became inevitable. That time gap between when something becomes visible and when anyone actually fixes it, that is where real risk lives. Not in dashboards, not in alerts, not in post-incident reports. If you don't understand that window, you don't understand exposure. And if you don't understand exposure, you're not managing risk. Today, we're going to define what the exposure window really is, formally, clearly, and in a way you can actually use. Up to now, we've talked about exposure drift, missed signals, and why most breaches don't start with sophisticated attacks. This is where the series changes. This is where we stop describing symptoms and define the system behind them. Here's the formal definition. The exposure window is the period of time during which an external asset, condition, or capability is exposed to potential adversary interaction without effective detection, ownership, or remediation. That's the definition. Now let's break it down. An exposure window opens the moment something becomes externally reachable or externally observable. That could be a system, a service, a domain, an API, or a forgotten asset that quietly drifts into visibility. The window stays open as long as that exposure exists without meaningful control, and it closes when the exposure is eliminated or deliberately constrained. Not when it's discovered, not when it's documented, not when a ticket is opened, only when it's actually controlled. This is not a vulnerability concept, and this is important. Vulnerabilities are attributes. Exposure is a condition. Let me repeat that. Vulnerabilities are attributes. Exposure is a condition. You can have exposure without a CVE, without an exploit, without a single alert firing. Attackers don't wait for conditions. They wait for time. Time is the core variable here. Most security programs are event-driven. An alert fires, a scan runs, a finding appears. The exposure window is time-based. It asks different questions. How long was this visible? How was it reachable? How long did one know about it? How long could it be interacted with? Because the longer an exposure stays open, the more likely it is to be discovered, indexed, probed, mapped, and eventually abused. Breaches really happen the moment exposure appears. They happen late. After exposure becomes familiar, after it becomes normalized, after it's been seen and ignored enough times. That's exposure drift in action. Another critical point, exposure is not binary. It's not on or off. It exists on a spectrum. An exposure can be completely unknown, known, but unowned. Owned, but unmanaged. Managed, but unmonitored. Monitored, but never acted on. From the outside, attackers don't care which category it's in. They only care that it's reachable. From the inside, organizations confuse things. They confuse inventory with ownership, awareness with control, alerts with risk reduction. The exposure window exists whether you acknowledge it or not. Intent does not close windows. Action does. There are three conditions that keep exposure windows open. First, lack of visibility. You don't know the asset exists or you don't know it's exposed. Second, lack of ownership. Someone knows, but no one is accountable. Third, lack of urgency. The exposure is known and owned, but deprioritized because nothing bad has happened yet. Most breaches live right there in the not yet space. Yep, that's what I call it, the not yet space. This is why traditional security metrics miss the point. They count things. Vulnerabilities, finding, alerts, tickets closed. They don't measure persistence, time. They don't measure accumulation. They don't measure how long exposure quietly compounds over time. The exposure window reframes that from, is this vulnerable, to how long has this been exposed and what could have interacted with it during that time. The shift matters. because risk isn't just severity times likelihood. It's risk is severity times likelihood times time. This is where the framework begins. From here forward, the exposure window becomes a way to measure exposure over time, not snapshots. Understand risk accumulation, not isolated events. Prioritize remediation based on window duration, not just severity scores. And explain breaches in terms leadership can actually understand. Final thought. You don't get breached because something was exposed. You get breached because it stayed exposed long enough. In the next part of the series, we'll break down how exposure windows open in real environments and why most organizations don't notice when they do.